Hello, I hope you're well. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is the reread tag. I was tagged by the lovely Rosie at Rosie Cockshut, and if you don't already watch her videos, I'll put the link to her channel in the description box for you. We all know how tags work, so let's just dive right into it. So the first question is, where do you sit on the rereading scale from almost never to all the time? I would say that I am an occasional rereader. There are always books that I say I'm going to reread, but rereading tends to be a lower priority for me. I am basic and attracted by all of the new and shiny books out there, and there are just so many books I want to read for the first time that sometimes it's difficult to pivot to something that I've already read and know how it ends. So, okay, question 2. Has that changed over your reading life? I think the urge to reread has intensified over the course of my reading life, but the actual execution, not so much. I think now that I can actually say there are books 10, 15, and in some cases even 20 years since I read them, that there are more books that I say I should revisit. But again, there are just so many new books out there that the actual plans and intention to reread kind of gets put on the back burner. So when do you reread? Maybe it's immediately after finishing a book, or not till years later, or when the mood strikes. So it's definitely a case of when the mood strikes. I don't have like a schedule of when I reread a book. I know some people will say that they always read a particular book in December for the holidays, or a particular season. I don't have any books that are really like that, but as far as how long it goes between my first reading and a reread, it's usually years. And when I say years, it's years. I'd say probably the minimum is 4 to 5 before I really consider rereading something. Okay, question 4. Why do you reread books? I think it's nostalgia. I think when I reread a book, it's because it's a book that holds a special place in my heart. It's a book that I've really enjoyed the first time, and so in rereading it, I'm kind of hoping to relive all of those emotions and feelings that made me love the experience the first time. So I do think it's a lot of that. There are certain books that I would give just about anything to read for the first time again, and those are the books that I tend to reread. And I think also, now that I have an actual reading life that spans a couple decades, I do think that part of it is a curiosity over how I'll respond to these books that I read years and years ago versus now. Because if I read a book when I was a 10, 12, 13-year-old, am I still going to have the same response emotionally? Am I still going to connect to it in the same way now that I am a 30-year-old? So I think those are my 2 reasons for that. Question 5. How do you reread? Faster, slower, or just the best bits? I definitely reread the books from front cover to back cover. I don't think that a reread impacts the speed in which I read something. I don't think I go faster. I'm definitely not skimming it because I want to relive it. And I don't think I'm necessarily going slower unless the reread was because of like a school assignment back in the day, where I was now taking notes because I had a particular project or paper that I needed information and quotes and analysis for. So I think that's the only instance when a reread might have been slower. Question 6. Who or what do you reread? More specifically, which authors or genres or individual books? generally speaking, I tend to reread classics more often than I do contemporary works. Part of that is the nature of having been an English major, so there was a lot of rereading in that case. But I also reread plays, and I haven't really spoken much about plays on this channel up until this point, but plays are something that I love to reread. And kind of like no performance is the same twice, rereading a play is never the same twice. So those are the two, I guess, genres that I would say I reread most often. Is there a book that you found better when you reread it? Yes, and let me grab it. I would say Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley would be that book that was better the second time around. I was probably 13 or 14 the first time I read this. I was going through a Arthurian legend kind of phase at that point and had just finished reading this Guinevere trilogy that's somewhere on my bookshelf behind me still. And I picked this up. It's huge. It's nearly 900 pages long, and I remember enjoying it when I read it the first time. And then I want to say summer of 2019? Yeah, summer of 2019, I decided to revisit this, and oh my god. There was so much nuance that I think 13 and 14-year-old me missed the first time around that makes this book so good. It's Arthurian legends, the story of Camelot, but told from the perspective of basically all of the key female characters within the legends themselves, or Morgan Le Fay, Lady of the Lake, Igraine, the whole Guinevere, the whole lot are basically the main characters and supporting cast of this book. And there was so much nuance in their depiction in this. And then there was this whole conflict of paganism versus Christianity in this book that I don't think I really understood at 13 or 14. This became a firm favorite, probably my favorite book of all time. It is probably the one book that I would reread sooner than the 4 to 5 years I previously mentioned. It's been sitting next to my bed, and on more than one occasion I have contemplated picking it up again and rereading it. So that would be the answer to that question. Question 8 is not a question. A book that you'd like even more upon a second reading. A book that will benefit from a second reading. So I would have to say that it would be Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, which is up on my bookshelf and now I'm too lazy to grab it. But I'm planning to do a reread of this as a buddy read with Katie from Katie Reads and Rants, and I'll link her channel for you. It's a book that I read when I was around 14 or 15, and I loved it then. But it's one of those books that I wonder if what I will take away from it now, 15 years later, when I am a 30-year-old woman with more life experience, is going to change or be different. I feel like the reading experience will be transformed now that I'm older and can maybe grasp more fully, more completely, some of the more adult situations, some of those things that I wouldn't necessarily have fully understood as a naive and inexperienced 15-year-old. I also think it'll be interesting revisiting it, considering that I studied so much Russian history and Russian culture, and I think that will impact the experience as well. And one that was worse. I would say that if there were one book that I were to revisit now that would probably have a more negative or less enthused reaction from me would be Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. Gone with the Wind was one of my favorite books for many, many years. And as a teenager, I reread it several times. At that point, I didn't understand some of the very problematic elements of the book itself and the plot. Now, rereading it, having experienced the Me Too movement and having experienced Black Lives Matter and still being in the thick of those, I think that my reading, my understanding, and my feelings towards the book itself would probably change. It would be a really eye-opening experience. I feel like I would recognize and probably be made to feel somewhat uncomfortable. That's a long-winded answer, but that's what we're going with. A book you want to reread because you didn't understand it the first time. To answer that question, it's not necessarily that I didn't understand this book, but I'm going to answer Gondel's Queen by Emily Bronte, which I actually read for Victober this year, so not that long ago. And I think because this is poetry, because this felt more academic in tone, that it needed more of my time and more of an active reading approach than I took when I was reading it as part of the Victober Readathon. I kind of have this opinion when it comes to poetry that you need to read poems at least 3 times for it to really sink in and for you to really understand. And since this is a novel in verse, I kind of stand by that opinion. This is one that I need to reread at some point. I didn't really enjoy it all that much, so it's gonna be on the back burner for a while though. So, number 11, a book from your childhood that you want to reread. So I don't know why this book popped into my mind a few weeks ago, but Charlotte's Web by E.B. White, I read that many, many, many moons ago. And to be honest, I can't remember much of the plot now. But I do remember the joy I had while reading that, and it would be nice to relive that and to relive a little bit of my childhood through that. 12. A book you want to reread because you read it a long time ago. So I already mentioned Anna Karenina, but same vein, War and Peace. I read that immediately after reading Anna Karenina when I was 14 or 15, and that was leisure reading for me. I was a strange teenager, but I would love to reread that for the same reasons as Anna Karenina. And another one would be Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. I also read that when I was 15, and it wrecked me. Because I'm a sadist, apparently, I would love to reread it. Which one book have you reread the most times? / a book you will read for the rest of your life. To answer the first part, the book that I've reread the most, I would say Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and that's partly because of school. I read that for the first time on my own as a teenager and absolutely loved it. I think it was really the first classic that I read on my own, not having it assigned to me as part of an English class. And then when I went to college, it was required reading for multiple lectures and seminars that I was in because I was focusing on 19th century literature. And then because my thesis was also on Gothic literature, it was something that I revisited again as I was preparing and doing my research. So I read it for pleasure a number of times. I read it again academically numerous times. As for the book that I will continue to reread for the rest of my life, it has featured heavily on this channel already, and if you do watch my videos, you probably already know the answer. That is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. That is just a book. I reread it in October. I have since acquired other books by Daphne du Maurier, which I am eager to read. I really hope they're as good as Rebecca, but there is something about Rebecca itself. It's just a stunning piece of literature. So, the last one is who I'm tagging. So, we're gonna go with the lovely Katie over at Katie Reads and Rants. We're also going to tag Noelle at Noelle7pages. And if there's anyone else who's watching who is interested in doing this tag, I officially tag you. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to chatting with you next week. Bye!